We already have our speaker here with us, our presenter Cynthia B, who translates the complex nature of water conservation into actionable step, smooth process, and innovative messaging. She is recognized as an expert in sustainable landscaping and a popular speaker on this topic at events around the Intermountain West. Cynthia holds a bachelor degree in landscape architecture for Utah State University, Go Aces. She has spent her career training both homeowners and professionals to rethink Utah built landscape environment, creating outcomes that are both beautiful and sustainable. She advocates and puts ideas in people's brain. That's how I like to tell her. Like, we have this lot of ideas, but we can't connect it. She waves her talks and presentation to put that idea in our brain so we can come and make change. So with that, Cynthia, it's all yours. Feel free to share your slides. We'll be in the background. If there's any technical error, we will jump in. Otherwise, it's all yours. And thank you all for joining in. I hope you like this presentation.
Okay, this is the part that is always the stressful part. There we go. Now I've got to change the view, right?
Yes.
Remind me where to do that. I get so
display right settings. Go to the display settings.
Display.
Yes. And
swap preventer shoot. There we go. Yes. That's the scariest part of an entire presentation for me, is that whole technical get the thing going. So, all right, well, let's jump in because we have a lot to talk about today. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've actually been working on the content in this class for 3 years. I have taught different iterations of it, and I think we've finally gotten it down to the best of what we know. As he said, my name is Cynthia B. I am an Aggie, of course, as all great plants people are in this state. And I'm just really excited. I've spent my career teaching Utahns how to landscape in the climate that we, actually live in. I currently work for Utah Waterways, which is a new nonprofit that was created by the legislature in 2023. And our charge is to accelerate water conservation statewide, public, private, bring in all the players from every angle. And that's what you're going to see with this tool. So let's talk about what we're going to learn today. Plants is the most difficult subject for everyone. Well, maybe second to irrigation. Irrigation is the most difficult, but when homeowners are attempting to make landscape changes, this is the thing that has been the most challenging for most people, and it is also the fun part. So let's look at this. So I want to rethink this whole system and how it gets accomplished in our state. And so first, we're going to learn how to see plants a little bit differently. We're going to see them well, I'll show you in a minute. We're going to learn how to create plant combinations using a proven formula. We're going to see how to adapt things based on local plant availability. One of the most difficult things is knowing how to substitute plants if you couldn't get the thing you wanted. I'm going to show you a logical way to make that work. And then we're just going to talk about this flexible strategy that can be implemented over time. I would say that so I've taught, oh gosh, at least 20,000 homeowners, if not more, in this state, how to landscape in different classes that I've done over the years. And so I would say 85% of those people are doing things one little project at a time or one piece at a time. And so it's even more difficult to get them to have a good holistic outcome when they're doing that. So I wanted a planting strategy that can be implemented over time. If you have $100 in your budget, I'm going to show you where to apply it. And then just fits seamlessly into existing yards. Again, 85% of the people I'm teaching have existing landscapes that they're working on and that they're trying to change. And so we want to show them how to accomplish that and how to fit the new things into the old things. And I think these are challenges that are not often addressed. Most often we act as though everyone's starting with a blank slate, and almost nobody is. So I want to first talk a little bit about the plant supply chain in Utah, but also beyond. And there's a lot of changes and challenges that have happened over the last few years, or the last decade, really, that have made a huge difference in what's available. And, if you bought a blue spruce, thank goodness for AI. I probably could have found photos of all of this, but now I didn't have to drive around. If you bought a blue spruce tree in the 60s and 70s, as you can see with this AI generated house, you had a nice blue spruce tree. And if you still have that blue spruce tree today, it's kind of taken over everything, right? You now own a blue spruce with a house attached. And that's because back in the 60s and 70s, there weren't, it was just the native plant, and there weren't a lot of varieties that were selected for being able to be smaller or, to fit landscapes a little bit better. And we're now in a position where there's been a lot of focus on that, and there's a lot better options that we can use. So another challenge, if we want to think about it, what is the most impulse purchase item in the whole country? Number one is candy, which is surprising to no one. But number two is plants, which is surprising to everyone. Not me, though, because if I walk into a nursery, I cannot walk out without a plant, whether I have a place for it, whether I have a plan for it. There is an element of do as I say, not as I do in this whole thing, because I am just a plant nerd. I see it, I want it, I got to have it. So I'm going to show you how to work with your inner plant nerd. So the system as it exists now, about 40% of all the plants that are sold in the United States are annuals. I consider them kind of the paper plates. And I know it's very cheesy to quote yourself in your own presentation, but I didn't dare attribute this to anyone else because I'm about to make people mad because this is such a huge part of the business. And really, annual flowers are just something we should be using in containers. They shouldn't be plants we're relying on in the landscape. If you need annuals to bring color in the landscape, it's because there's other problems with the planting design that I'm going to teach you how to correct today, so that you don't need that. And the reason is that annuals need as much water as lawn. And so, we're trying to reduce water overall. And so this is an easy place to make a cut. Plus, they come and go. Other challenges that we're facing in the system is just availability, right? In Salt Lake County, we are losing our nurseries, our independent garden centers. The land has become so valuable that it's really difficult for those nurseries to stay in business when they're offered millions of dollars and no work to just sell the land that they're built on. And so we're seeing this need to have more and more plants in our supply chain, but we're seeing fewer and fewer suppliers. I know that box stores will pick up some of that, and that's an even bigger challenge because although we do have a good local supplier that brings in some of these perennials that are water wise and stuff to the local garden centers, there's not a way for regular people to know what those plants are. And so there's some work that will need to be done there. Customer patterns have changed too. So with the popularization of our landscape exchange programs where we're paying people to remove lawn and put in water efficient landscapes up to $3 a square foot, and more than 60% of the state's population live in areas where they qualify for those incentives. So what we're seeing is that a regular customer is now behaving a little bit more like a commercial customer. So in the past, you might have gone in and bought 2 or 3 of something at most, usually just onesie twosie. But now if you're flipping a park strip, for example, you're going to be repeating those. And so you might want 10 or 15 of the same plant. And nurseries aren't set up for that right now. So that's a change in customer pattern that's happening and will continue to scale. Of course, demand for native water-wise and pollinator plants has increased. This is great news. But the challenge for water-wise plants is they don't look quite as attractive in the nursery. And so they're harder to sell on the back end. Plus, they tend to get overwatered as they're waiting for purchase in the nursery. And so that can further damage them. So we need a little bit better dissemination system there. And then there are more gardeners than ever, but there's also less interest in active maintenance. So, we all are working more hours. We don't have the time, even if we want to spend the time out in the landscape, we just don't have the same amount of time that we might have had 2 generations ago. And so we've got to figure out how to make that work a little bit better. In terms of growers and what's available, growers tend to be focused on the patented plants. Those are plants that require special, special kinds of culture, and that's because they're just more profitable. And then they are also looking to have that marketing appeal. So when you have those patented plants, you're creating these exclusive offerings, and you've got the new introductions every year. And I can't be the only nerd that Googles every single season, new plant introductions 2025. We all want to see it. We buy those things. And so we're all driving the system that makes it hard. And then, of course, just reduces the net aggregate of this reduces the life cycle of plants in the marketplace. So a patent, there are 3 categories of patent in the United States. And there's a utility, a design, and a plants patent. So one whole category of patents in this country are just for plants. And as patents last about 7 years, most of these plants will last while they're in patent, and then they magically disappear and something new gets introduced. And so it makes it difficult. You know, when I first graduated from school, if I put a Mount Baker lilac on a plan, I could expect that 5, 6, 7 years later, 10 years later, that plant would still be available and a person could still, you know, select and put that in. Not true anymore. And so we're seeing this rapid change. We've definitely seen introductions of better quality plants, you know. So before 2012, all the butterfly bushes were tall and leggy and, you know, and took a lot of space. And then it was very exciting in 2013. We had that Lo and Behold series that came out that took the big plant and downscaled it. And then in 2018, the Pugster series came out, which gave us full-size flowers on a small plant. And so you can see that over time, these introductions get better and better and better. So if you have older plants that you've been committed to for a long time, consider that, you know, there are some value in changing up to some of these newer varieties that are giving us a lot better bang for our buck. There's also a disconnect in the system between designers, land use, and the plant supply chain. And if you think about it, if you have a doctor, they all have different specialties. You would not expect your podiatrist to have the same knowledge as your brain surgeon, right? Like they all are dealing, it's the same system. It's, you know, that's all a body system, but everyone deals with different pieces. And the same is true on the green industry, maybe with a little less dire consequences, but there is kind of a disconnect. So as a designer, I would always go and look for the newest, coolest, most interesting plants. And I didn't always know that people could get them. And that is a challenge. And so I want to help people get the coolest, most interesting plants that they can actually get and actually use. And so I want to bring down this disconnect a little bit between these systems. Also, you know, the system that we as landscape designers were taught to use was all the same. Whether you were designing a residential landscape or a commercial landscape, we were taught the same skill set and to use the same techniques. And really, they're different problems that are being solved. And so it doesn't cross over quite as well. And we need to look at that a little bit differently. This is an example of a plant schedule that I created a lot of years ago, and it just shows how we were trying to balance the landscape and think about all of the things. And it's a list that gives you a snapshot in time. I have in the 30 years I've been practicing, I have never once had a landscape go in without some kind of a substitution. So the problem with a list like this is that it doesn't have any flexibility built in based on the plants you can actually get. It's completely disconnected from the supply chain. And as the plan ages, how do I substitute that? How do I change that? I can't, or I don't know how. I can, you know, obviously you can speak to a nursery person or whatever, but one of the things that we found, and the local nurseries have confirmed this for me, and any of you that are listening right now from a local nursery will feel the pain on this one, but I call it one true plant syndrome. If it's on somebody's plan and they can't get that specific plant, they don't know that for every plant that I stuck on a list like this, there were 7 or 8 other things that I could have put in their place that would have worked just as well. I literally sometimes had to just kind of eeny, meeny, miny, mow it because they're interchangeable. But homeowners don't know that. They've paid big money for a plan sometimes if they've got a plan, right? And so they don't realize that, no, there's other things that can be used there. I want to move away from that a little bit so that people can activate on their plans a little bit better. And nurseries have told me that people with a plan are often harder to help than people that don't have one, specifically for this reason, the substitution. And if I can't get that one thing, there's nothing else that will work. And that's just, the good news is that's not true. There are other things that will work. The bad news is up until now, there hasn't been a good way to know what those things are. I'm going to show you what we're working on that's going to change that. Okay, so there's a lot of assumptions that are made with design. First, of course, that we're starting with a blank slate, which is rarely true. Whenever design is taught, it assumes that people will complete the entire project in a single season. I started my own landscape makeover in 2007, and I'm hoping to complete the very last phase this year. I don't think I'm atypical. Well, hopefully most people do it faster than I have, but that's just the way that budget, time, energy have worked for me. It assumes that there's never going to be a change to the design, that however it was designed is how it's always going to look, and you're not going to need to make any adjustments, which of course is rarely true. It assumes that plants are not going to die, and if they do die, that you're going to just replace it with the exact same thing that just died. And that's not very realistic either. And then it just seems like the plants will always be available 5, 10, 20 years into the future. So this is the problem with the way that we as design people are designing right now. It just doesn't function with the system that exists. And so there's a disconnect there. Okay, so great. What works instead, right? Let's check that out. So one of the first things to think about is that landscapes need layers. Now, you can see this is a very wide planting bed. It's irrigated with drip irrigation. This is a combined effort of myself and Liz Hamilton, who's an amazing horticulturist. She did the fall design. I came back in the spring and adjusted it when there was a little bit more plant availability. And there are different layers and levels here. One of the things to think about is that in the state of Utah, over the next decade, we will need to transform several 100 million square feet of lawn for water-wise alternatives. A big percentage of that will be planted spaces like you see here. And so just get your mind around that number for a moment, because as I started to think about that, I'm like, there is no scenario under which our current supply chain is scaled to handle what this state needs to have happen in order to have water security. And so that's really where I wanted to focus is getting our supply chain ready. Those landscape incentive programs are driving demand. New ordinances that are being adopted at the city level are requiring this on all new construction. Within the next few years, the entire state will be under those new rules for new construction. Those that have existing landscapes are not forced to change it, but obviously attrition will happen and incentives exist for that. And so, you know, this change has to happen. So let's talk about what it should look like instead, because people get all or nothing thinking. It's either a traditional landscape that I'm used to, or it's gravel with cactus and lava rock and cattle skulls. And really, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about lawn, but smaller areas of lawn in most parts of the state, other than Washington County, where they probably have little to no lawn. And then planted spaces, hardscape spaces. The Local Scapes series teaches you how to design differently. This is kind of, we're going to focus on the plants part of that. So when we do a planting bed, so often we just think about, you know, putting everything in a nice little row like you see here. This is a fine line buckthorn, which is an awesome shrub, but look at that. Ugly ankles. Not only that, but you can see that very little of that soil area is shaded by the shrub, and that means that those areas are all ripe for weeds. If we add a second layer of plants, a low-growing layer of plants to that, what ends up happening is it shades out the soil, it reduces the number of weeds you're going to get, but also makes it a lot more attractive, obviously, in its place. And so that's kind of what we want to think about, is that we're doing at least 2 layers, and then one screens for the other, and they provide accent based on each other. So the layers of the landscape are our overstory, which are trees, privacy, transition areas, detail plantings. These are things that you see close up. And then, of course, surface plantings, which are going to be ground covers. So let's go over what those factors are. The overstory is trees that could be, you know, 8 to up to 50 feet tall. Lots of variables there. Here's the thing: for most properties, I would recommend that even your big shade tree, you don't choose one that grows more than 40 feet tall. No matter how tall it grows, you're not getting additional value for that extra height. It's not creating more shade necessarily, but it is creating more expensive work and more difficulty in managing and maintaining it. You know, it's much easier to prune and deal with the smaller trees. So, and as our properties are continuing to shrink in size, really be careful about the number of large trees that you plant. Now, if you have a huge property, obviously that's different. Even that giant spruce is a desirable thing. So it's all relative to your property size, but really think carefully about going too tall on some of those trees. I think this is one of the least utilized opportunities or privacy shrubs. So these are things that will grow 10 to 15 feet tall. What you're seeing right here is a black lace elderberry from my yard that is on my side yard planting bed. And when I put it in, it was tiny, and I have a 10-foot wide planting bed there. This shrub obviously eats the entire planting bed, and it shades out all the soil underneath it. So even though there's a 10 foot of width by 25 feet long, because I've got 2 of them or 3 of them planted adjacent to each other, I don't do any yard work underneath these. I occasionally do a little bit of pruning. What you don't see is my neighbor's bathroom window that is behind the shrub. So we both appreciate the privacy that the shrubs afford. Transitions are going to be those moderate-sized shrubs. They make a backdrop in most parts of the landscape. Lots of good shrubs for that. There's maybe some of the larger perennials, like, you know, your Perovskias or your hardy hibiscus. And then, of course, some of the larger ornamental grasses as well. And so that's that backdrop layer that provides kind of, you know, I call it a transition layer because it moves between smaller things or larger things. And so in terms of shrubs, this is where most of your shrubs will likely be. Detail layer, this is where we're going to spend most of our time on, will be on that transition, mostly detail layer, because of the new tool that we're going to be talking about deals right now in our pilot program year just with grasses and perennials. If it catches on, then we'll invest in making, you know, a lot more plants available through all of these different layers. But I wanted to at least show you what those layers are. And so this is kind of that idea. And these are things that you're going to see up close. And so that's why I call them the detail. Sometimes they'll be the very front of, you know, the plants, or they'll be adjacent to paths, things like that. And then, of course, surface layer plants. So these are your ground covers. These are those super low growing things. I love this example right here because it's a living mulch. And so here they have all these beautiful perennials. Twice a year they do maintenance on them, and the rest of the time they just keep down weeds, require very little water, and just look kind of amazing. The thing to realize with the ground covers are that the reason that we pick them is so they will cover the ground. And the reason that people often end up hating them is because they cover the ground. So, you know, pay attention to that. I like to put them in places, depending on which ones I'm using, in places where they can be kind of contained, so I don't have to worry. In this case, these are all more perennials than ground cover, and some shrub and some horizontal junipers as well. But it's contained within the eyebrow of a half-circle driveway. And so there's not too big of a risk of them taking off, even if this were one of the more aggressive ground covers. When we think about plants for our yard, we almost always think of individual plants. So in this case, you know, a beautiful lavender plant, right? But what makes it beautiful, and the secret that designers know, and how you get that designer quality outcome, is to understand that beauty is created through contrast. So there is that blooming plant, but there's also how it looks adjacent to its neighbors. So in this case, there's that golden foliage sedum, and there's a Santolina that's offering a different bloom contrast, but also a texture contrast. And the three of those things together are what makes this planting special. And so if you're trying to create a designer outcome in your own landscape, we're going to have a certain percentage of our plants that need to be in planned combinations, and I'm going to show you the easiest way to make that happen. So we talked about how the list isn't serving us and having a plant list. What we need to think of instead is a team. And with the team is a roster, right? So in honor of the Super Bowl this past week, that I didn't even know who was playing till the day of, but that's why I had to Google which positions are on the team. But on a football team, right, everybody has a different spot that they're playing. They have a different job to do, and they have a reason that they're on your team. You can trade them. You can can one of them if they're not working for you. Unlike a regular football team, though, when it comes to plants, you can also duplicate players that are really great, right? So there is a plant roster, and we'll send out a link to this for anyone that wants that after. But I like to think of plants as a roster, and I'm going to show you how we'll work through these combinations, and you can see how to make a roster of plants in your yard. The first thing I would do is, once I teach you what the traits are, is to take the little list and walk your yard and see which plants you already have that might fit one of these spaces on your roster, and then you'll know. It might be that you already have a really great foliage plant. It just will look better if you pair it up with a bloom and a texture, and then you're improving what you already have. So I don't want anyone to feel like you're going to have to just completely start over, or you can't make this work. I'm showing you how to fit this into the landscape you have. Okay, so let's talk about how to build those combinations. How do we create them? So there's kind of, like I call it, the three keys, right? There's three components. Bloom. So when we're talking about perennials, there's different lengths of time that they're in bloom, but they come through and go through the season, and they provide the most interest. When my oriental poppies are blooming, no one's looking at anything else in my landscape, right? But they don't last. And so you can't build your whole landscape around that, because it's here and then it's gone. It's very ethereal. The next is foliage. So a foliage plant might also bloom, but the reason I would choose dead nettle in a shady spot isn't because of the purple flowers. It's because of those green and white leaves. They're going to make that shady space brighter and lighter, and they're going to provide contrast with the plants around them. And that foliage is going to be interesting all season long. So the blooms are going to come and go. The foliage is that anchor that keeps it attractive. And this is probably the number one thing that people are missing in their landscape are more plants to create that contrast of foliage. And then the third, with a very bad photo, is going to be a texture plant. Most often that's going to be some type of grass, but really it's about the leaf size and shape. So maybe it's got very large leaves planted next to something with very small leaves, or a really interesting, palm-shaped leaf versus the fine blades, or whatever it is. It's the point of the texture plant is that it creates leaf contrast. Now, of course, sometimes things are more than one thing, right? In this case, this gold bar maiden grass has beautiful foliage and also texture. So sometimes if they've got multiple traits, you're just gonna have to choose for your own eye which one you're gonna prioritize and say, okay, this one's this and this one's that. So it's not a perfect fit, but it gets you closer. And every now and then there's just that magical plant that does all the things. This is a Neptune's Gold Sea Holly in my own yard, and you can see it's got awesome texture. It's got blooms for this, I think late spring, and just that gold is incredible. It just glows, right? And I would love to see more of these plants get into landscapes because they're what makes the yard look special. But they're also the thing that people don't know to buy. We're so focused on blooms in the nursery that we don't always understand how these other traits are going to really make our plants stand out. So when it comes to creating these combinations, I would say roughly, now it just depends on how big your planting beds are and how much of your yard's already landscaped, but shoot for 40 to 60% of your plants at maturity are going to be these different combinations. And don't worry, I'm going to show you how all of this gets applied. But roughly, we want to do 40 to 60% are combos. Whatever else is left are what I call wild cards. And that can be anything. And we'll go through that as well. So it's kind of a mix of these two types of things. We're going to have combinations, and then we're going to have single species, just one plant of something. That's the wild card. So when it comes to our combination components, these are the things. So we have bloom, foliage, and texture, but we also have these subcategories in bloom, which is all season, early spring, summer, fall, right? All season, there's very few plants that fit that definition because they need to bloom 3 months or longer. Not a lot of plants do that, so it made it really easy for me to constrain the list. But the bigger key is that those seasonal blooming plants need to bloom for at least 6 weeks or more in order to be part of a combination. It doesn't mean you can't use other plants. It means those that bloom less time will be a wild card, because what we're trying to do with our combinations is ensure that we have nonstop color all season long. And so we're only including the highest performing plants. And this is not how I was trained to design. I was just trained to look for spring, look for summer. But if you think about it, something that's blooming for 6 to 8 weeks in the spring versus 2 weeks has completely different impact in your landscape. Now, my goal as a person that's trying to get more water-wise landscapes throughout this state, I know that people that jump and do it and take the leap of faith and they're first in their neighborhood, if they have an amazing outcome, it will catch on. I've seen it over and over and over the last decade, that wherever we have a good example, everybody looks at it and copies it. So I am highly motivated to make sure that you have good examples so that it gets duplicated in your neighborhood. Now, it doesn't have to get copied exactly, but I want everyone to have a gorgeous yard. So that's why we're kind of focusing in on these combination components. So here's our early season, the bloom elements. Again, here's just a close-up of what it takes. There's other types, I'm sure, of foliage, but you get the general idea here. And then, of course, those leaf contrasts and the differences between them. Some of them might be fuzzy leaves, or they might have larger or smaller. Okay, so here's our little mix and match. And so we're going to take a bloom. So if we're going to do our first combination, now if you're just doing your first group of combinations and your limited budget, start with the all-season anchor, right? We want that longest bloom that we're going to get. So we're going to take that, we're going to mix it with a foliage and a texture, and that creates a combination. If you're doing a park strip, I would do an all-season anchor combination, and then I would just go ahead and add a bloom option from each of the seasons. So that's 7 total plants, and that's a park strip design. And you'll have nonstop color in your park strip all season, along with those other things as well. If you're looking at a bigger landscape, that's where we can get into actually making combinations for the different seasons. If you don't have room for all 5 combos, then I would prioritize that spring and summer, or spring, summer, fall, and put less emphasis on the early spring. But either way, you know, it's an option. Okay, so here's the thing. When we talk about how do we make these combinations, one of the things that I want you to look at is, okay, so here's a nice little combo, right? We've got bloom, texture, foliage, but it's not just one thing that works. So we can choose any of these for all season, right? And these are all going to be in the plant selection tool. So I pick one, maybe I wanted, you know, whatever color I've chosen, right? Next, I'm going to go with the foliage plant. So we have different options. And maybe I like how this Greek mountain tea contrasts with that beautiful white flower with the yellow center. And I like the way those two look together. So maybe I pick that. Or maybe I want a bolder contrast with this darker foliage. Or maybe I prefer kind of the fine, interesting texture of this lemon fizz Santolina. And then we add that last one, which is our texture. And again, so you can see, no matter which one of these I choose, it's not a loser. It just really does come down to some personal choice elements as to which plants you're using for which purpose. And so we'll make those groups. And I'm going to show you in the next, in a later section of this class, how we apply those in the landscape. So now let's look at our wild cards. This is where we give you permission to do what you're pretty much already going to do anyway. And so what makes for a wild card? It's the impulse purchase. It begged us to buy it. It might be something that is incredible in bloom, but doesn't bloom long enough to build your landscape around it. So, you know, if peonies are blooming, no one's looking at anything else, but that lasts for 2 weeks, and then what? And so I can add a peony. I can still have those plants in my wild card section, right? And I don't need to group them with anything. I can put a single plant in if I want. I can do a grouping of them, whatever we want to do. But they're not that foundational plant. Maybe it's something you already have in your yard and you just need to pair it up with something else. So you're like, oh, look at that. I've got this barberry. It already has pretty foliage. If I just add an ornamental grass and something that has contrasting blooms, I've now turned this thing that already existed into something cool. Or it's just, I don't know what to do with it. It's already there. I don't even know what it is. That's fine. If you don't hate it, work around it. It can be because of remembrance. My mom's favorite flower was columbines. And so I like to have those in the shady part of my yard because every time I see them, it makes me think of my mom, and that always is going to make me smile. If it's blue, I mean, what other reason do you need, right? There's so few perennials that have these gorgeous true blue flowers that if you find one, you got to take it home. You got to have it. And then sometimes it's just an awkward fit. Again, when these hardy hibiscus are in bloom, especially the ones with that dark foliage, because why would I pick one with green leaves when I can get one that also has burgundy foliage and gives me even more impact? But it's a little bit of an awkward plant to use because it's the size of a shrub, but it's a perennial that dies back. And so it's a great option for a wild card because it might otherwise be hard to pair up. Okay, how do we get the combinations? How are we going to buy those in the nursery, right? So, okay, I'm very excited. This actually won't say Utah Waterways on it, although that's the organization I work for. We will brand it for Slow the Flow, which is the statewide water conservation campaign that our organization has taken over starting this year. And so this is the first tool that we'll be introducing through Slow the Flow. And so this is a little bit old, but you can see it. So you're going to put in your plant hardiness zone. And then you'll go through, you'll make some options and choices based on what you're trying to solve for. And then it will suggest some designer pre-made combinations that you're welcome to use. There'll be a bunch of us that include those. And then this is my favorite part. This is why we call it Tinder for plants. If you want to make substitutions like we just showed, you'll be able to go in the tool and make those substitutions. You'll be able to learn more about different plants that are available. Okay, so then here's the slider. Watch this part. I love this part. It'll just change, and you'll see it change out on the top there as that plant changes, and you'll be able to kind of swing those around, print your combinations, and all of that will just make it easier. There's checkout online, there's local nursery purchase, and we'll go through more of that here in a moment. But you can see that, yeah, you can actually get that through your local nurseries, and we'll have different nurseries that are participating. If you are listening to this webinar and you're with one of our local nurseries, get in touch with me after. We'll have all the materials, and to be clear, this is funded by donations, and so to our organization. So there is no cost to the consumer, and there is no cost to our local nurseries. This is completely free to you guys to use to make your projects easier. Our online pre-orders will actually be working through High Country Gardens, and I'm super excited about this. If you know anything about water-wise plants, you know they're the biggest name in water-wise plants. What you might not know is that those plants are all grown and shipped out of Utah. So we're still benefiting our nursery industry here in Utah, even if you're ordering online that way. We're also working with our local retailers. So when you put in your zip code, it will pop up the closest nurseries that are participating in the program, and you'll be able to shop there as well. I know Progressive will do a little bit of a hybrid between those two things, where you order online for pickup or delivery locally. So we're working through those different options, just based on who's participating and how. What's really fun is that when you use the tool and you put plants on that pre-order, it actually, when you go to proceed to checkout, it takes everything you put in from the tool and it populates the checkout cart in High Country Gardens. So we are not part of we want to facilitate the supply chain. We don't want to be part of it. So Utah Waterways doesn't sell any plants. Slow the Flow won't be selling any plants. We're just helping you access the right plants and make that happen. But checkout will all go through these other companies. And so we think that's the cleanest, simplest way for all. Okay, this is old. Can you hear that? I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember granimals, but this is kind of the thing that inspired this whole planting methodology. So granimals were created so that kids could learn how to do all the nuance of matching clothes without having to know all the details, right? And that's what we're trying to do here with plants. So it will not look like this, but we will have special tags that are like the granimals tags in your local nursery. So as you're walking around, you will literally see what you need to do to mix and match those different plants. So you'll pick a bloom texture foliage. You'll be able to walk the nursery. You don't even have to use the digital tool if you don't want. You'll be able to see those labels in the nursery and make your choices accordingly. At first, I thought I was going to have to plant tag it. So this was just a sample plant tags that I made. What we'll likely do is just have cards on the tables. And that came as a direct recommendation from one of the nurseries. So they just saved my bacon, because every plant tagging program has ultimately failed because it's a logistical nightmare. And so being able to use a digital tool and then combined with those table cards in the local nursery, I think we'll get the same output without all of the pain. Here, again, I think this will be put in the chat as well. So we are planning to launch this tool around March 7th in conjunction with the Home and Garden Show. I do have free tickets I can hand out to the show, so let me know if y'all need it. But we will be doing a yard school at the Home and Garden Show, where there'll be all kinds of quick classes. You can get to everybody that you need at once, and this tool will become available there as well. Okay, so let's look at how to apply it, and this is the final part of the class here. So I teach a concept I call triangulation, and that is repeating things 3 times. So let's look at that. Thank you, AI, for saving my bacon yet again. So and in this particular drawing, let's pretend all the existing plants aren't there. Let's do the best we can. I'm not great with AI. But what we're going to do is we're going to add those combinations as a group of 3, right? And we're going to triangulate it. Now, on an all-season anchor, I might do 5 instead of 3, whatever. It depends on how much space you have. But the idea is I'm going to put these in the most visually prominent locations, and there's that combination. Then we're going to go to the next season, early spring, same thing, triangulate that combination. And I love doing it this way because I used to give people a full landscape plan. They would look at all these plants at once and think about how to apply them to the landscape and get completely overwhelmed. But when we're looking at these combinations, you're only having to think in clusters of space, right? You're thinking about a 3x3 area instead of your entire yard, and just how you can repeat that. And so it becomes less overwhelming to just add these combinations, right? So, and again, we're just triangulating everything, because your eye is going to follow those as they're blooming. Your eye will follow it around the yard. And so that's why I like to do it in a triangle. It doesn't matter what kind of triangle. We're not triangulist here. It can be any type of triangle. But the idea is that we're going to repeat those combinations and generate, that kind of an outcome. And this is how we're going to lay those plants into the landscape. And we're going to work around what already exists. I know in this case, I just threw them on top of things, but you get the general idea there. And then you're going to fill in with wildcards. So any space that's left over after you've placed your combinations, fill it with whatever you want. You can add additional combinations. You can just go and randomly grab something from the nursery and throw it in. However you want to do it is fine with me. And then that's how we end up filling in the remaining space. Okay, and that's it. That's the new way that we're going to be working through planning design here in Utah. I think it has a lot of benefits for homeowners, and I hope you guys will use it and enjoy it. Questions?
Awesome. Thanks. Cynthia, can you stop sharing so we can
Yes.
have, yeah, we can start checking at the questions. Thanks. That was awesome presentation. And we also have our co-host Ben. Before Ben takes on the questions, I would like to tell you, if you need the slides, when the webinar ends or you sign out, you quit, you'll get a link to put in that feedback. And on the last part of the feedback, just say, I need the slides, and put in your email. If you want ticket to Home and Garden, so I don't know how many Cynthia has, but put in your name as well and your email, and I'll provide all the list to Cynthia, and we'll see how that works out. So with that, thank you so much, Cynthia. I learned so much, and I already signed my name for the wait list, so we'll see when that launches. But now, like Ben, can you go on to the questions and see what we have here?
Yeah, and Chital, if you could help me a little bit, I had to jump off for a minute and it cleared my queue out, so you might have to read some of the ones I missed. But
Okay.
the first one that I had, so if anyone has more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll answer those as well. This is a comment from Edward. He asked, most of the presentations seem to be geared around looks and not too much on functionality and benefits from the water use. Defensive fire zone, perspective blooms and foliage color and textures are cool, but use of plant materials that are functional water savers plus provides defensible fire mitigation seems to be the more value to consumers. So consumers, I guess, from that one are looking at, they like to see the water use on the app that you developed. Does it go over that? Does it include water use, I guess?
It does. So, and it will call out things. I'm not sure that we're going to add native at this point because native is so subjective and problematic in Utah with all of our elevation changes and such. Native to where and how. But any plant that is in the tool is already an acceptable plant to use in the state. So it's either a moderate to low to xeric water use, and all of that information is contained within the tool. So consumers already know if they're using it, it's there. Now, I know that one of the challenges is when you try to make things simple, that's really difficult. So you're talking about layers of abstraction and detail that my consumers aren't ready for yet. And so I've got to bring people along a spectrum. And I find that we most often fail when we try to go from 0 to perfect. I've got to build skill sets for people. They've got to be able to handle it. They've got to have success at every step of the way, or we lose them. So the biggest risk isn't that people don't do it, it's that they do it and fail. And so the goal here is to try to make sure that, I'm working with the plants that are already in the supply chain. One of the things that we're doing on the back end of this is creating data that, pulling that data, which plants are people interested in? And then it is not tied to people specifically, but it helps our nurseries know where the demand is and our growers know, so that we can upscale production of the different plants that we need. And so there is a lot that's built into it behind the scenes too to help Utah do that. Over time, I expect to get more and more natives and more water-wise as the supply chain can get it. But if people can't get it in the marketplace, it doesn't do me any good to put it in the tool.
That's right. Yeah, Cynthia. And I have had that. When I design and develop this irrigation calculator, there is always tools to improve, but then you got to make it simple and then also have that information there. So I 100% agree on that. And Ben, I can read the questions that I have here. I am a landscape architect in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I am working with the city of Haley, and they are asking if there is a lawn grass combination that can handle the traffic of the people and dogs in the public park. Cynthia, you can take this, but I also put a link to Kelly Cop, and Kelly also can help with that. But
no, Utah State's got an amazing research facility. Kelly Kopp is an expert in that. So I can take a stab at it, and I could probably give you a decent answer, but I could never answer it as good as Kelly. There are some new hybrid Bermudas that we've been working with here that are not invasive, but are really, really good for those, those landscapes where it needs some durability. And I know that's been popular here, and we've had really good outcomes for people that have utilized it.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, and Kelly knows a lot about that. So if you need more details, so check out CUL website. We might already have the information there. If not, email Kelly and she will guide you something. The second one is from Megan. My neighbor has had a huge rodent problem with this year. Mice, voles, gophers, and even few rats. I find that the dense planting or the dense perennial like yarrow are becoming homes and hidey holes for those rodents. If there anything from a design or maintenance point that I can do for myself and suggest my neighbor, I mean, yeah.
Ooh, I am not an expert on the pests. I'm so sorry. I like densely planted spaces. I do get mice occasionally in my yard. I have cats, but they're not always doing their job. But I like more densely planted spaces because of the impact it has with weeds. It's counterintuitive, but more densely planted spaces. You do more work in the spring and fall, but then I do less weeding overall because they're shading out the soil and they're also camouflaging the weeds that my lazy self didn't get to. But in terms of rodents, if they're coming in from the neighboring property, a lot of times people that live adjacent to fields have that issue. I am a big fan of deep edging. So I have a type I buy off Amazon called grass barrier that goes down 10 inches. It's a nightmare to install, but it works really well. I actually met up with a homeowner a couple seasons ago, and she dug around, this is a nightmare, but she dug around the whole perimeter of her yard and put in a plastic sheet that went down 2 feet that just made her yard really hard for those critters to get into. I am not that desperate, but if you lived adjacent to a field, sometimes that's what it takes. But Utah State does have some publications through Extension specifically on dealing with voles. And so if you do a Google search for Utah State Extension and whichever critter you're dealing with, they have expertise that's way beyond what I would know on that.
Yes. The next one is from Nicole. Are the plants list available somewhere now? X all season bloom plant for my season. It'll be released in May or March sometime. So please email to the wait list and Cynthia will keep you updated.
Yeah, I'll make sure that you have that.
And how do you incorporate larger plants in this planting method?
Yes. Okay. So I talked about small plants because that's kind of where we're starting. When I'm designing professionally, I have a combination I call the foliage focus that I do more with shrubs. And the combination there would be 2 foliage colors and a texture. I didn't get into that in this tool because I'm, again, trying to simplify. You guys, it's taken me so long to take everything I've learned in 30 years and bring it down to an hour. And so, there are different combinations that I would use as a professional that I might not, that I'm not going to get out there to homeowners. I mean, obviously this is for the DIYer that's not going to hire the pro. It's never going to be as good as a trained quality professional. But it's going to help a whole lot of people. And honestly, a big part of it too is just knowing how to substitute. Because again, we've talked about how, it's those plants aren't always available. And so then you've got contractors just kind of scattershotting it anyway. And so I'm hoping to make this a little bit easier for them to know what is more reliable to substitute something with.
That's
But
awesome.
yes, you can apply these same formulas to larger plants as well. I just don't have them in the tool yet.
So Nancy asked, will this combo card be available only in Central Utah nurseries or around the state, or what?
Well, I hope to see that. We want it to be statewide. So it's just a matter of which nurseries are going to participate. But yeah, we're open. We want it to be the entire state, and we will probably see some adjustments probably next year for Washington County, where there's some additional plants and things like that are available. It's already sorting by your zip code. So if there's a plant that doesn't work in your zip code that's in the tool, you just won't see it because it won't come up when your zip code comes up. And so we do know that we want to focus more on getting some Washington County stuff. But again, first off, before we put any more into it, we're just trying to make sure we've got the right tool in the first place. What's really fun, so this tool was developed by Scott Brady at Simplyscapes. It's based on my methodology, but it's Scott's magic that makes it possible to go digital. I could never in a million years pull that off. And one of the things that's really cool is that Utah Waterways has created a Utah instance of this tool. But Scott's working with different parts of the country to do the same thing for their part of the country. So there's a version for, Irvine Ranch, California. There's a version for other parts of the nation where they want to do the same kind of thing, but with their best local plants.
Good.
Hey, Cynthia, I guess one more kind of follow up to that, we had a couple questions asked while you're going over that. Do you know if are you guys going to produce a list of nurseries that are opting into the program?
It'll be in the tool. So you put your zip code in and it will show you who's the closest nursery to you. And because there's no cost to nurseries, I'm hoping to get all of them. I mean, all of them that sell perennials and grasses, right? Across the whole state, because I mean, why wouldn't you? It helps your customers. And, and I think it's fun too for on the nursery side. I was an 18-year-old kid thrown to the dogs in the perennials section of the nursery. I knew nothing about plants, and here I am trying to help people. And so the tool is also intended for those new to the profession to be able to competently help the customers in these nurseries get the plants that they need that are going to work, and for them to feel confident that they can help people get what they need.
Okay. And for the tool, Stephen asked in the chat a little bit ago, are they able to let external friends and neighbors know about the coming plant tool?
Heck yes, tell everybody. And we will have pre-order. So the high country stuff is kind of a pre-order situation. One of the things that I'm really hoping is that the tool gets busy enough that we can do more of that pre-order side of things. And that's where it's going to really come in handy for getting more of the natives and plants like that into the supply chain, because they're able to grow to demand. And so I'm hoping to do a spring and a fall pre-order, and we'll have even some of our local nurseries. So for example, a local nursery that might only produce annuals and vegetables for spring, and then their facilities sit there all summer long. What if we could get a second season of them growing plants for the fall pre-orders? And so that gives them additional season of income, but also gets more plants in our plant supply circulation with facilities that already exist. So you can see I have a lot of goals with this thing, but we got to start somewhere. So please tell your friends and family about it so that it does catch on, and that we can, I can get more of the funding partners that have contributed now to fund it so that we can get across all sizes of plants and the full breadth of what we need to make this happen in our landscapes.
Okay. All right, then Megan asks, are there any designers who use this method in Davis County that you would recommend?
Yes, there will be. We're going to be doing some demonstration landscapes this year. I get to actually give away some landscape makeovers in Salt Lake County. Unfortunately, it's only in Salt Lake County because of who's funding it, but we're going to actually show in a real landscape what I just showed you with the triangulation and how those are applied. We'll do that there, and we're working with some local designers. So I know Kristen Hansen of Our Nesting Space is someone in Davis County that has utilized this same kind of concept. Designers already are naturally designing this way. They've just never thought about why they do it. They just have the eye to see it, but they haven't necessarily thought about their whys in the same way. So I just put voice to what they're already doing. There's nothing necessarily so revolutionary from a design perspective here, but it's the way that we're delivering the information. Oh, Kristen's on the call. Yay! Yep, I would let Kristen design my yard. She's great.
So will there be an opportunity for contractors to participate and be used as a resource to install this landscape? I mean, everyone can.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see contractors use it. They're a big part of who I made this for. I started when I was still a student at Utah State. I spent my summers working in nurseries. I worked for Progressive Plants, and I've also worked for a landscape contractor. So I have experienced firsthand the pain of getting the plants you need to complete the job for the customer. And a big part of who I'm trying to serve with this tool is our professional community so that they can get what they need.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions. Ben, do you see anything that I left?
I think we got them all.
No. Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And with that, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, guys.